The morning teacup trembled in her hands as Camilla Parker Bowles stared at the photograph spread across the mahogany desk. The image showed Kate Middleton laughing with a group of charity workers, her radiant smile filling the frame. But it wasn't Kate's beauty that made Camilla's blood run cold. It was the headline beneath it, Future Queen Catherine, the People's Choice. For years, Camilla had fought to earn her place beside Charles, weathering storms of public disapproval and media scrutiny. She had finally begun to feel secure in her role as queen consort, only to watch a younger, more beloved royal threaten everything she had worked to build. The public adored Kate in a way they had never embraced Camilla, and the numbers didn't lie. Approval ratings, social media followers, charitable donations. Kate was winning the hearts of the nation. What happened next in the private corridors of Buckingham Palace would send shockwaves through the monarchy and test the very foundations of the royal family. This is the untold story of ambition, loyalty, and the dangerous game of royal politics that played out behind closed doors, where one woman's desperate move to secure her legacy would ignite a battle that would change the House of Windsor forever. The rain drummed against the tall windows of Clarence House as Camilla sat in her private study, surrounded by newspaper clippings and tablet screens showing social media feeds. The digital age had brought new challenges to the monarchy, and she was acutely aware of every comment, every share, every like that favored the younger generation of royals over her own efforts. Margaret Hartwell, her trusted private secretary, knocked gently before entering with another stack of morning papers. Margaret had served the royal household for nearly 2 decades and had witnessed the transformation of Camilla from the controversial other woman to queen consort. Yet even Margaret could see the growing tension in her employer's demeanor. "The coverage from yesterday's hospital visit is quite positive, Your Majesty," Margaret offered diplomatically, though they both knew the truth. While Camilla's charitable work was mentioned respectfully, the real headlines belonged to Kate's simultaneous appearance at a children's foundation across town. The photographs showed Kate kneeling with young patients, her natural warmth radiating through every image. Camilla set down her reading glasses and rubbed her temples. At 76, she felt every day of the long journey that had brought her to this position. The years of being vilified in the press, the careful rehabilitation of her image, the gradual acceptance by the public, it had all seemed worth it when Charles finally ascended to the throne. But now, watching Kate's effortless popularity soar, old insecurities began to resurface. "Margaret, I need you to arrange a meeting with Sir Clive Alderton," Camilla said, referring to the king's private secretary. "And please make it discreet. I don't want this appearing on any official schedules." Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly, but she simply nodded. In her years of service, she had learned when to ask questions and when to simply execute instructions. This was clearly the latter. The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon in a small conference room at Buckingham Palace, away from the main corridors where staff and visitors might take notice. Sir Clive Alderton, a tall man with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes, had served the royal family with unwavering discretion for over 15 years. He understood the delicate balance of royal protocol and personal relationships better than perhaps anyone else in the household. When Camilla arrived, she found Alderton already seated with a selection of documents spread before him. The room smelled of old leather and polish, a comforting reminder of the institution's permanence. Yet today, Camilla felt anything but secure in that permanence. "Sir Clive, thank you for accommodating this meeting on such short notice," she began, settling into the chair across from him. "I wanted to discuss the allocation of royal duties for the upcoming season." Alderton leaned back slightly, his expression neutral but attentive. "Of course, Your Majesty. How may I assist you?" Camilla had spent hours preparing for this conversation, carefully crafting her words to sound reasonable and strategic rather than driven by personal concerns. "I've been reviewing the schedule, and it seems that many of the high-profile engagements have been assigned to the Prince and Princess of Wales. While I certainly understand their appeal to younger demographics, I wonder if we might be missing opportunities to showcase the full range of the royal family's capabilities. The subtext was clear, though neither spoke it directly. Camilla was suggesting a redistribution of the most prestigious royal duties, the ones that generated positive headlines and strengthened public bonds. She wanted a larger share of the spotlight that had been increasingly focused on William and Kate. Alderton nodded thoughtfully. You raise an interesting point. The king has indeed been pleased with the public response to the Wales's recent engagements. However, I can certainly see merit in ensuring a more balanced representation across all senior royals. Encouraged by his diplomatic response, Camilla pressed forward. Precisely. I was thinking, for instance, of the upcoming state dinner for the President of France. Traditionally, such events showcase the continuity and wisdom of the monarchy. Perhaps it would be more appropriate for the king and queen consort to take the lead role, with the younger royals in supporting positions. This was a significant suggestion. State dinners were among the most photographed and internationally covered royal events. They represented the monarchy's diplomatic power and cultural influence. For months, it had been assumed that William and Kate would play prominent roles alongside King Charles, given their popularity and the positive international attention they generated. Alderton made notes on his pad, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. I can certainly bring this to His Majesty's attention. Are there other events you'd like to discuss? Camilla had prepared a list, and she went through it methodically. The opening of the new children's hospital wing, the centenary celebration of a major charity, the state visit to Ireland, all events currently scheduled to feature William and Kate prominently. She argued for each with carefully constructed reasoning about royal hierarchy, diplomatic precedent, and the importance of showcasing the monarchy's full range of representatives. As she spoke, Camilla watched Alderton's face for any sign of his reaction. The man was famously unreadable, a quality that had served him well in his position. He listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions about logistics or protocol, but gave no indication of whether he viewed her suggestions favorably. There is one more matter, Camilla said as their meeting neared its end. I've been considering the possibility of expanding my own charitable portfolio, perhaps taking on patronages that might benefit from more experienced royal involvement. This was perhaps the boldest part of her strategy. Several high-profile charities currently counted Kate as their patron organizations that dealt with mental health, children's welfare, and arts education. These patronages had flourished under Kate's involvement, generating significant donations and public attention. Camilla was essentially suggesting that some of these might be better served by her own involvement. Alderton set down his pen and looked directly at her. Your Majesty, these are certainly substantial suggestions. I should mention that any significant changes to royal patronages or engagement schedules would need to be discussed not only with His Majesty, but also with the Prince of Wales. Such decisions affect the entire family's strategic positioning. The mention of William sent a small chill through Camilla. She had hoped to present Charles with a fait accompli, a carefully reasoned plan that he could simply approve. The idea of negotiating directly with William, of having her motivations scrutinized by the younger generation, was less appealing. Of course, she replied smoothly. I simply wanted to ensure that these ideas were properly formulated before presenting them for broader discussion. The monarchy's success depends on all of us working together effectively. Alderton gathered his papers and stood. Indeed it does, Your Majesty. I'll prepare a summary of our discussion for His Majesty's review. Shall I indicate any particular timeline for these considerations? Camilla hesitated. Too much urgency might appear suspicious, but too little might allow momentum to shift away from her proposals. I think the sooner we can optimize our approach, the better. Perhaps these matters could be discussed at next week's family meeting. I'll see what could be arranged, Alderton replied diplomatically. After he left, Camilla remained in the conference room for several minutes, staring out at the palace gardens where tourists gathered hoping for a glimpse of royal life. They came seeking connection to something larger than themselves, drawn by the pageantry and history that the monarchy represented. But increasingly, she knew, they came hoping to see William and Kate. The drive back to Clarence's house gave her time to consider her next moves. The conversation with Alderton had gone well enough, but she knew the real test would come when her proposals reached Charles and William. She needed allies, people within the royal household who understood her position and could help advocate for her vision. That evening, Camilla hosted a small dinner party at Clarence's house. The guest list was carefully curated. Lord Chamberlain, the lady-in-waiting to the Queen Mother's former household, and several long-serving members of the royal staff who had witnessed the family's evolution over decades. The conversation flowed over excellent wine and perfectly prepared courses, touching on everything from parliamentary developments to upcoming cultural events. Only as dessert was served did Camilla gently steer the discussion toward royal matters. I've been reflecting on how we might better utilize the full spectrum of royal experience in our public engagements, she said, cutting in her lemon tart. It seems we sometimes forget that the public benefits from seeing not just youthful energy, but also the wisdom and gravitas that come with experience. The lady-in-waiting, Lady Pemberton, nodded thoughtfully. There is something to be said for the institutional knowledge that senior royals bring to their roles. The public may not always recognize it immediately, but consistency and depth of experience do matter. Lord Chamberlain, ever the diplomat, added, balance is certainly key. The monarchy's strength has always been its ability to represent both tradition and adaptation to changing times. These were exactly the responses Camilla had hoped to hear. By the end of the evening, she felt confident that word would spread through appropriate channels about her concerns. The royal household, like any complex organization, operated on networks of influence and informal communication alongside official protocols. 3 days later, Margaret informed her that King Charles had requested a private meeting. Camilla's heart raced as she prepared for what could be either validation of her position or a difficult conversation about overreach. She chose her outfit carefully, a navy suit that conveyed both authority and respect, paired with the sapphire brooch Charles had given her on their wedding day. Charles received her in his study at Buckingham Palace, a room filled with personal photographs, inherited furniture, and the accumulated treasures of a lifetime spent in royal service. He looked tired, she thought, the weight of the crown more visible in private moments than in his public appearances. "Camilla, my dear, please sit," he said, gesturing to the familiar chairs where they had shared countless conversations over the years. "Clive has briefed me on your suggestions regarding the upcoming season schedule." His tone was neutral, neither encouraging nor dismissive. Camilla felt her carefully prepared arguments organizing themselves in her mind, ready to be deployed as needed. "Charles, I hope you understand that my concerns come from a place of wanting what's best for the monarchy," she began. "I worry that we may be creating an imbalance that doesn't serve our long-term interests." Charles leaned forward, his hands clasped. "Tell me more about your thinking." For the next hour, Camilla laid out her vision. She spoke of the importance of showing the public that the monarchy valued experience alongside youth, of ensuring that all senior royals had meaningful roles that utilized their unique strengths. She carefully avoided direct criticism of William and Kate, instead framing her proposals as strategic optimization of royal resources. Charles listened intently, occasionally asking questions that revealed he was considering not just her words, but the implications behind them. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the garden where he had played as a child. "You make compelling points," he said finally. "The monarchy does need to demonstrate its full range of capabilities. However, any significant changes would need to be discussed with William. These decisions affect his family directly, and their perspective is important to consider." Camilla felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. She had hoped Charles would simply approve her suggestions and present them to William as decisions rather than proposals. Now she would need to make her case directly to the younger generation, a prospect that filled her with apprehension. "Of course," she replied. "I would welcome the opportunity to discuss these matters with William. I'm confident we can find approaches that work for everyone." Charles smiled, but there was something cautious in his expression. "I'm sure you can. William has always appreciated your support and guidance. I'll arrange for you to meet with him early next week." As Camilla left the palace that afternoon, she realized that her carefully planned strategy was about to face its greatest test. William was not just the future king. He was also a protective husband and father who had watched his wife bloom into one of the monarchy's greatest assets. Convincing him to step back from the spotlight would require all her diplomatic skills and more. The game had begun in earnest, and the stakes were higher than she had initially imagined. In the world of royal politics, even family relationships were subject to strategic considerations, and Camilla was about to discover just how formidable an opponent William could be when he perceived a threat to his family's position. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at Kensington Palace, in the same sitting room where William and Kate had announced their engagement years earlier. Camilla arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather portfolio containing carefully prepared talking points and supporting documents. She had spent the previous evening rehearsing her approach, tried to anticipate William's questions and concerns. Kensington Palace felt different from Buckingham Palace, less formal, more lived in, with evidence of family life scattered throughout. Children's drawings hung alongside priceless paintings, and the scent of fresh flowers mixed with something that might have been baking cookies. It was a reminder that this was not just a royal residence, but a family home. William greeted her in the entrance hall, dressed in casual slacks and a sweater rather than formal attire. His manner was cordial, but reserved, and Camilla noted the slight tension around his eyes that suggested he was prepared for a difficult conversation. "Stepmother, thank you for coming," he said, using the formal address they had settled on after years of navigating their complex relationship. "Kate sends her apologies. She's at Charlotte's school for a parents' meeting." They settled in the sitting room, with tea served by a discreet member of staff. William poured for both of them, a gesture that struck Camilla as both polite and subtly controlling. He was the host here, setting the terms of their interaction. "Father mentioned you wanted to discuss the upcoming season schedule," William began without preamble. "I understand you have some suggestions about realigning certain responsibilities." Camilla had prepared for this moment, but sitting across from William in his own home, she felt the full weight of what she was attempting. This was not just about royal schedules or public relations. She was asking a devoted husband to step aside while she took opportunities away from his wife. "William, I hope you'll understand that my concerns come from a place of wanting to strengthen the monarchy as a whole," she began, echoing the language she had used with Charles. "I've been observing how the public responds to different types of royal engagements, and I think we might be missing some strategic opportunities." William set down his teacup and leaned back in his chair. "What sort of opportunities?" Camilla opened her portfolio and withdrew a folder containing press coverage analysis, public polling data, and comparative studies of royal engagements. She had done her homework thoroughly, and the documents supported her arguments with objective data. The monarchy benefits when it can demonstrate both continuity and innovation, she explained, spreading several charts across the coffee table. "While Kate's work has been tremendously successful in reaching younger demographics, I think we may be inadvertently creating a perception that the royal family's value lies primarily in youth and glamour rather than experience and institutional knowledge." William studied the documents, his expression unreadable. The data was compelling. It showed high approval ratings for Kate's work, but also revealed that older demographics sometimes felt less connected to the younger royals' approaches to traditional causes. "These are interesting findings," William acknowledged, "but I'm not sure I understand what changes you're proposing." This was the moment Camilla had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. She took a deep breath and launched into her carefully prepared presentation. She spoke about the upcoming state dinner, suggesting that the focus should be on Charles and herself as the senior royal couple. She discussed the children's hospital opening, arguing that her decades of charitable work gave her special insight into healthcare initiatives. She addressed the arts patronages, noting that her long-standing relationships in cultural circles could bring added value to those organizations. With each suggestion, she watched William's expression grow more guarded. By the time she finished her presentation, the friendly atmosphere had evaporated entirely. "Let me make sure I understand correctly," William said, his voice carefully controlled. "You're suggesting that Kate should step back from several of her most successful patronages and high-profile engagements so that you can take them on instead." The blunt summary made Camilla's proposals sound far more mercenary than she had intended. "I'm suggesting that we optimize the allocation of royal responsibilities to maximize benefit for the monarchy as a whole," she replied, trying to maintain her diplomatic tone. William stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens where his children often played. When he turned back to face her, his demeanor had shifted noticeably. "Camilla, I appreciate your commitment to the monarchy, but I think you're misunderstanding something fundamental here. Kate hasn't stumbled into success by accident. She spent over a decade building relationships, developing expertise, and earning the trust of the organization she represents. You can't simply transfer that credibility to someone else." The criticism stung, though Camilla tried not to show it. "I'm not questioning Kate's achievements. I'm simply suggesting that there's value in having senior royals take on certain types of responsibilities that require different kinds of experience. What Kate lacks in decades of royal experience, she makes up for in genuine passion and authentic connection," William continued, his voice growing firmer. "The children's hospital patronage isn't just about cutting ribbons and posing for photographs. She spent countless hours learning about pediatric care, meeting with families, and developing programs that actually make a difference. The public responds to her because they can see that authenticity." Camilla felt her carefully constructed arguments beginning to crumble under William's passionate defense of his wife. She had prepared for logistical objections and scheduling concerns, but she had not anticipated such an emotional response to what she viewed as strategic planning. "William, I understand your loyalty to Kate, and I admire it," she said, trying to regain control of the conversation. "But surely you can see that the monarchy benefits when all senior royals have meaningful roles that utilize their strengths." "What I see," William replied, returning to his chair but remaining visibly tense, "is an attempt to solve a problem that doesn't exist by creating several new ones. Kate's work isn't taking anything away from you or anyone else. The monarchy is big enough for all of us to contribute meaningfully." The conversation continued for another hour, but it became increasingly clear that William was not going to be persuaded. Every argument Camilla made was met with a counterargument that demonstrated not just his protective instincts toward Kate, but also his sophisticated understanding of how modern monarchy functioned. When she suggested that state dinners required the gravitas that came with experience, William pointed out that Kate's presence attracted international media attention that benefited Britain's diplomatic relationships. When she argued that older demographics needed to see senior royals in prominent roles, William noted that Kate's work bridged generational gaps in ways that purely traditional approaches could not. As the meeting drew to a close, Camilla realized she had not just failed to convince William, she had actually strengthened his resolve to protect Kate's position. The defensive posture he had adopted suggested that he now viewed Camilla as a potential threat rather than a family member with legitimate concerns. "I think we should probably wrap this up," William said as the afternoon light began to fade. "I'll certainly share your thoughts with Kate, and we can discuss whether there are ways to better coordinate our activities. But I want to be clear that any significant changes to her patronages or schedule would need to be initiatives she supports, not impositions from elsewhere." Camilla gathered her documents, feeling defeated, but tried to maintain dignity. "Of course, I hope you'll both consider the broader strategic picture as you make those decisions." The ride back to Clarence's house gave her time to process what had gone wrong. She had approached the conversation as a negotiation between rational adults seeking to optimize royal resources. But William had treated it as an attack on his family that required a vigorous defense. The disconnect revealed how differently they viewed Kate's role and value to the monarchy. That evening, Camilla found herself walking through the gardens at Clarence's house, trying to clear her head and plan her next moves. The failure with William had been more comprehensive than she had anticipated, but it had also revealed important information about the dynamics within the royal family. Margaret found her there as the sun was setting, bringing a shawl and the evening's correspondence. "Your Majesty, there are several messages that require your attention," she said gently. Among the letters was a note from Lady Pemberton, thanking her for the dinner party and mentioning that she had spoken with several other members of the royal household about the need for better balance in royal representation. Another message came from a longtime supporter who had heard rumors about potential changes to charitable patronages and wanted to express support for Camilla's increased visibility. These small signals suggested that her efforts to build support within royal circles had not been entirely unsuccessful. While William might be unmovable in his defense of Kate, there were others who understood Camilla's position and might be willing to advocate for her interests through different channels. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Margaret informed her that Sir Clive Alderton had requested another meeting, this time with greater urgency than their previous discussion had suggested. When they met that afternoon, Alderton's demeanor was notably more serious than it had been during their earlier conversation. He carried a single folder and wore the expression of someone bearing difficult news. "Your Majesty, I wanted to update you on the response to your proposals," he began without his usual diplomatic pleasantries. "I've now had conversations with both His Majesty and the Prince of Wales, and I'm afraid the reaction has been somewhat more complex than initially anticipated." Camilla felt her stomach tighten. What sort of complexity? Alderton opened his folder and withdrew a single sheet of paper. "The Prince of Wales has requested that I formally document the current allocation of royal duties and charitable patronages, with particular attention to the rationale behind existing arrangements. He's also asked for a comprehensive review of any proposed changes to ensure they align with the monarchy's strategic objectives." The language was bureaucratic, but the meaning was clear. William was not just rejecting her proposals. He was creating an official paper trail that would make future attempts to redistribute royal responsibilities much more difficult. He was essentially forcing the royal household to choose sides in a conflict Camilla had hoped to resolve quietly. "I see," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "And what does this review process entail?" "Any proposed changes to senior royal duties would need to be justified through formal consultation with all affected parties," Alderton explained. "This would include not only the royals themselves, but also the charitable organizations, government officials, and other stakeholders involved in these relationships." Camilla realized with growing dismay that William had outmaneuvered her completely. By demanding formal processes and official documentation, he had transformed her private campaign into a public bureaucratic exercise that would expose her motivations to scrutiny from multiple directions. Furthermore, Alderton continued, "The Prince of Wales has suggested that any future discussions about royal duty allocation should include the Princess of Wales as a direct participant, given that many of the proposed changes would affect her work." This was perhaps the most devastating blow of all. Not only had William rejected her proposals, but he was now insisting that Kate be directly involved in any future negotiations. The woman whose prominence Camilla sought to diminish would now be positioned as an equal partner in decisions about royal responsibilities. Camilla spent the remainder of the meeting discussing procedural details and timelines, but her mind was already racing ahead to consider her options. The direct approach had failed more spectacularly than she had imagined possible, and William's countermoves had left her in a weaker position than when she had started. As she returned to Clarence's house that evening, Camilla realized that the game had changed fundamentally. What had begun as her attempt to secure a larger role for herself had become a battle for influence within the royal family, with William and Kate emerging as far more formidable opponents than she had anticipated. The stakes were now higher, the positions more entrenched, and the possibility of quiet resolution increasingly remote. If Camilla wanted to achieve her objectives, she would need to adopt more sophisticated strategies and accept that the conflict might become more public than she had originally intended. The war for royal prominence was just beginning, and the first battle had decisively gone to the younger generation. But Camilla had not survived decades in the royal spotlight by accepting defeat easily, and she was already beginning to formulate new approaches to the challenge ahead. The royal household's autumn schedule meeting took place in the grand conference room at Buckingham Palace, its walls lined with portraits of monarchs stretching back centuries. The massive mahogany table could accommodate 20 people, though today only 6 were present. King Charles, Queen Camilla, Prince William, Princess Kate, Sir Clive Alderton, and Margaret Hartwell taking minutes. Kate had arrived early, dressed in a navy suit that projected both professionalism and confidence. She had spent the previous week preparing for this meeting with characteristic thoroughness, reviewing every patronage, every scheduled engagement, and every strategic initiative currently under her purview. William had briefed her on his conversation with Camilla, but Kate understood that she needed to defend her work on its own merits rather than relying on her husband's protection. When Camilla entered the room, the atmosphere immediately grew tense. The two women exchanged polite greetings, but their careful courtesy only emphasized the underlying conflict. Charles, clearly uncomfortable with the family dynamics at play, attempted to maintain a businesslike tone as he called the meeting to order. "We're here to review the upcoming season's royal engagements and address some questions that have been raised about optimal allocation of responsibilities," he began, gesturing to the thick folders of documents distributed around the table. "I want to ensure that our approach serves both the monarchy's institutional interests and the personal strengths of individual family members." Sir Clive Alderton took the lead in presenting the current schedule, methodically reviewing each major engagement and explaining the rationale behind existing assignments. The state dinner for the French president would feature Charles and Camilla as hosts, with William and Kate in prominent supporting roles. The children's hospital opening remained assigned to Kate as patron of the organization. The Arts Festival Gala would be Kate's responsibility as well, given her patronage of several participating institutions. As Alderton spoke, Camilla felt her frustration mounting. The presentation made it clear that despite her private campaigns, nothing had changed. If anything, the formal review process had solidified existing arrangements and made them appear even more logical and defensible. When Alderton finished his presentation, Charles turned to Camilla. "I believe you had some thoughts about potential adjustments to these arrangements." This was her moment, but the formal setting and Kate's direct presence made Camilla's arguments feel far more personal and petty than they had in private conversations. She had prepared extensively, but facing Kate across the conference table, she realized that attacking a beloved family member's work in such a direct forum might backfire spectacularly. "I remain concerned about ensuring proper balance in how we represent the monarchy's full range of experience and expertise," Camilla began carefully. "While I certainly respect the excellent work that Kate has done in her various roles, I wonder if some adjustments might better serve our long-term institutional interests." Kate leaned forward slightly, her expression attentive but wary. "Could you be more specific about what adjustments you have in mind?" The direct question forced Camilla to abandon her diplomatic language and address her proposals explicitly. She outlined her suggestions regarding the state dinner, the hospital opening, and several charitable patronages, trying to frame each as a strategic optimization rather than a personal power grab. Kate listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes on the pad before her. When Camilla finished, Kate's response was measured but pointed. "I appreciate your perspective on institutional balance," Kate said, her voice steady despite the personal nature of the discussion. "However, I think it's important to consider the relationships and commitments that already exist around these roles. The Children's Hospital, for example, has spent 3 years developing programs specifically designed around my involvement and interests. The families we serve there know me personally, and the medical staff has invested considerable time in educating me about their work." She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. To suddenly change leadership of that patronage wouldn't just be logistically challenging. It would be a betrayal of the trust those people have placed in the royal family. The same applies to several of my other patronages. These aren't just ceremonial positions that can be transferred at will. William watched this exchange with visible pride in his wife's measured response, but also with growing concern about where the conversation might lead. Charles appeared increasingly uncomfortable as he realized that his family was essentially conducting a public argument in front of staff members. Camilla felt cornered by Kate's reasonable-sounding objections. Every point the younger woman made was technically correct, but they completely ignored the broader questions of royal hierarchy and institutional precedents that Camilla believed should take priority. "Kate, I understand your commitment to these organizations," Camilla replied, trying to maintain her composure. "But surely you can see that there are times when institutional considerations must take precedence over personal preferences. The monarchy has survived for centuries by adapting its approach to changing circumstances." This was perhaps the most direct challenge Camilla had issued, and it prompted Kate to abandon her diplomatic tone in favor of a more passionate defense. "I don't think what I'm describing are personal preferences," Kate responded, her voice gaining strength. "I'm talking about professional responsibilities and public commitments. When I became patron of these organizations, I made promises to serve them effectively and consistently. Those promises weren't conditional on whether other family members might later decide they wanted those roles instead." The room fell silent as the implications of Kate's words settled over the participants. She had essentially accused Camilla of asking her to break faith with the organizations and people she served, framing the discussion in terms of honor and duty rather than royal politics. Charles cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess to allow everyone to collect their thoughts." But Camilla was not ready to retreat. The formal setting and Kate's confident responses had only strengthened her resolve to assert her position more forcefully. "Kate, I think you may be misunderstanding the nature of royal service," Camilla said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "These patronages and roles exist to serve the monarchy, not the other way around. Individual royals are temporary stewards of these responsibilities, but the institution continues regardless of who happens to hold them at any given moment." William's jaw tightened visibly at this implicit criticism of his wife's understanding of royal duty. "I think Kate understands royal service quite well," he interjected. "What she's describing is the difference between meaningful engagement and ceremonial rotation. The public responds to authenticity and genuine commitment, not just whoever happens to hold a particular title." "William, please," Charles said, trying to restore order to the discussion. But the dynamic had shifted beyond his control, and both sides were now fully engaged in defending their positions. Camilla turned her attention to William directly. "I understand your desire to support your wife, but you're both still relatively new to this institution. There are precedents and protocols that exist for good reasons, even when they might seem inconvenient. This was a mistake. By emphasizing William and Kate's relative inexperience, Camilla had inadvertently reminded everyone present that she herself had been even newer to royal life when she married Charles, and that her own path to acceptance had been far more controversial than theirs. Kate seized on this opening with devastating effectiveness. "You're absolutely right that precedent matters," she said, her voice now carrying a subtle but unmistakable edge. "And the precedent for royal patronages is that they're awarded based on genuine interest, relevant experience, and the ability to serve the organization effectively. That's how I receive my patronages, and it's how I've tried to honor them." The implication was clear without being explicitly stated. Kate had earned her positions through merit, while Camilla was asking for them to be reassigned based purely on royal hierarchy. Sir Clive Alderton, recognizing that the meeting was spiraling out of control, attempted to intervene with procedural suggestions. "Perhaps we might benefit from individual consultations with the organizations in question," he suggested diplomatically. "Their perspectives on any potential changes would certainly be valuable to consider." But Camilla realized that such consultations would almost certainly favor Kate, who had spent years building relationships with these organizations and their leadership. The suggestion, while diplomatically phrased, was essentially another roadblock to her objectives. "That's an interesting idea," Camilla replied, "but I'm not sure it addresses the fundamental question of how the monarchy should allocate its most visible and influential roles. Some decisions need to be made based on broader strategic considerations rather than just the preferences of individual organizations." Charles had heard enough. "I think we've explored this topic sufficiently for today," he announced firmly. "Clive, please prepare a summary of the key points raised, and we'll revisit these questions after everyone has had time to consider the various perspectives presented." The meeting concluded with polite but strained farewells, and the participants dispersed to their respective offices and residences. But the damage had been done. What Camilla had intended as a private family discussion about royal responsibilities had become a formal confrontation that exposed deep divisions within the royal household. In the days following the meeting, word of the conflict began to spread through the palace staff and eventually to trusted media contacts. The story that emerged in whispered conversations and carefully anonymous briefings was of a power struggle between the king's wife and his son's wife, with implications that extended far beyond scheduling disputes. Kate spent the evening after the meeting at Kensington Palace, processing what had occurred with William's support and guidance. She had handled herself well under pressure, but the experience had been emotionally draining and professionally concerning. "I can't believe she essentially accused me of not understanding royal duty," Kate said as they sat together in their private sitting room. "As if the work I've done for the past decade doesn't matter because she thinks she has a better claim to these roles." William pulled her closer, his own anger at Camilla's behavior still simmering. "You were brilliant in there. You made it impossible for anyone to question your commitment or effectiveness. But I'm worried this isn't going to end with today's meeting." He was right to be concerned. Camilla returned to Clarence House that evening more determined than ever to achieve her objectives. But now she understood that subtle diplomacy and family negotiations would not be sufficient. If she wanted to secure her position and legacy within the monarchy, she would need to deploy more sophisticated strategies that went beyond private conversations and official meetings. The battle lines had been drawn in the most public and formal way possible. Kate had proven herself a formidable opponent who would not be easily intimidated or outmaneuvered. William had demonstrated that he would use every resource at his disposal to protect his wife's position, and Charles had shown that he was either unwilling or unable to impose a resolution that might favor one side over the other. As news of the conflict began to reach a wider circle of royal staff and external advisors, both sides realized that the private family dispute was evolving into something more significant and potentially more damaging. The stakes were no longer just about individual royal roles, but about the future direction and public perception of the monarchy itself. The game had become more complex, with more players and higher consequences. And both sides were beginning to understand that victory might require strategies and alliances that neither had originally contemplated. The quiet corridors of royal power were about to become the setting for a much more public and consequential battle than either Camilla or Kate had initially imagined. 3 weeks after the contentious family meeting, an unexpected event shifted the entire dynamic of the royal conflict. Kate collapsed during a visit to a London hospital, overcome by what palace doctors later described as exhaustion and stress. The incident, witnessed by medical staff and captured by photographers waiting outside, sent shockwaves through both the royal family and the broader public. The images of Kate being helped to a waiting car, visibly shaken and pale, dominated news coverage for days. Public sympathy immediately rallied around the Princess of Wales, with editorial commentaries praising her dedication while questioning whether the royal family was placing too much pressure on its younger members. William was beside himself with concern and anger as he sat in Kate's hospital room that evening. Watching her sleep under medical supervision, he couldn't shake the feeling that the recent stress from Camilla's campaign had contributed to his wife's collapse. The doctors assured him that Kate's condition was not serious, but The episode had been a stark reminder of the human cost of royal politics. Charles arrived at the hospital within hours of learning about Kate's condition, his face showing genuine worry and perhaps some guilt about his failure to resolve the family tensions before they reached this point. He found William pacing the corridor outside Kate's room, his usual composure completely shattered. "How is she?" Charles asked immediately. "Physically, she'll be fine," William replied curtly. "The doctors say it was exhaustion and dehydration, probably brought on by stress. But, Father, this can't continue. The pressure she's been under lately, the constant questioning of her work and her role, it's affecting her health." Charles had feared this conversation was coming, but Kate's collapse made it impossible to avoid any longer. "William, I know things have been difficult lately. Perhaps we need to find a different approach to managing these family dynamics." "What we need," William said, his voice rising slightly, "is for someone to stop undermining my wife's position and work. Kate has given everything to this family, and she shouldn't have to defend her right to serve effectively." The criticism was pointed directly at Camilla, though neither man spoke her name explicitly. Charles found himself caught between his loyalty to his wife and his protective instincts toward his son and daughter-in-law. Meanwhile, news of Kate's hospitalization reached Camilla at Clarence's house, where she was hosting a small reception for supporters of one of her charities. Margaret whispered the update in her ear during a break in the evening's proceedings, and Camilla felt a complex mix of concern and apprehension wash over her. She understood immediately that Kate's collapse would be interpreted by many as a consequence of the royal family's internal conflicts. The optics were devastating. A beloved princess overcome by stress while the king's wife appeared to be challenging her position. Whatever sympathy Camilla might have earned for her own concerns about royal roles would evaporate in the face of public sympathy for Kate. The next morning's newspaper coverage confirmed her worst fears. The headlines were brutal. "Palace pressure overwhelms princess. Kate's health crisis exposes royal tensions." And "Is the crown too heavy for its rising star?" Several articles, clearly based on palace sources, hinted at internal disputes over royal responsibilities and suggested that Kate had been under unusual stress in recent weeks. By afternoon, Camilla received a request from Charles to meet him privately at Buckingham Palace. The summons carried an ominous formality that suggested this would not be a comfortable conversation. Charles received her in his study, but this time there were no offered refreshments or comfortable seating arrangements. He remained standing behind his desk, and his expression was graver than she had ever seen it. "Camilla, I want to discuss yesterday's events and how we move forward as a family," he began without preamble. "Kate's collapse has created a situation that requires immediate attention and resolution." Camilla had spent hours preparing for this moment, crafting arguments about how Kate's health issues were unrelated to legitimate discussions about royal responsibilities. But facing Charles's obvious distress and anger, her prepared defenses felt inadequate. "Charles, I'm certainly concerned about Kate's health," she began carefully. "But I hope we're not going to suggest that legitimate discussions about royal strategy are somehow responsible for personal medical issues." Charles's expression darkened. "Legitimate discussions are one thing. What's been happening lately goes well beyond strategic planning. William has shared with me the details of your various meetings and proposals, and, frankly, I'm disappointed by the approach you've taken." This was not the supportive response Camilla had expected from her husband. Throughout their marriage, Charles had generally deferred to her judgment on matters of royal protocol and public relations. His direct criticism was both surprising and alarming. "I've been trying to ensure that all senior royals have meaningful roles that utilize their experience and expertise," Camilla replied, falling back on her familiar talking points. "That seems like a reasonable objective for any organization, including the monarchy. The monarchy is not a corporation where we can simply reassign responsibilities based on seniority or hierarchy," Charles responded firmly. "These roles involve real relationships, genuine commitments, and public trust that has been earned over years of dedicated service. What you've been proposing would damage those relationships and undermine the very effectiveness you claim to want to improve. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, but it became increasingly clear that Charles had made his decision. Kate's collapse had crystallized for him the human cost of the family's internal conflicts, and he was no longer willing to allow the situation to continue. "Camilla, I need you to step back from this campaign," he said finally. "The damage to family relationships has become too significant, and the public implications are becoming problematic for the monarchy as a whole." Camilla felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Not only had she failed to achieve her objectives, but she was now being asked to abandon them entirely by her own husband. The isolation was more complete than she had imagined possible. "Charles, surely you understand that I've been acting in what I believe are the monarchy's best interests," she said, making one final attempt to salvage her position. "I believe your intentions have been good," Charles replied diplomatically. "But the execution has created problems that outweigh any potential benefits. William and Kate have my full confidence in their current roles, and I want that support to be unambiguous going forward." The message was clear. Charles was choosing sides, and he was choosing William and Kate over Camilla's ambitions. The game was over, and she had lost decisively. 3 days later, Kate returned to public duties with a carefully orchestrated appearance at a children's charity event. She looked radiant and healthy, her recovery complete, and her commitment to her work obviously undiminished. The photograph from the engagement showed her laughing with young participants, completely at ease in her role and clearly beloved by the organization's staff and beneficiaries. William accompanied her to the engagement, a gesture that emphasized both his support for his wife and his protective stance regarding her position. Their joint appearance sent a powerful message about the strength of their partnership and their unified approach to royal responsibilities. The palace's official statement about the event made no direct reference to recent controversies, but its language was carefully chosen to emphasize continuity and stability in royal patronages. The message was subtle but clear. There would be no significant changes to existing arrangements. For Camilla, the weeks following Charles's ultimatum were a period of difficult adjustment. She continued her regular royal duties and maintained her existing patronages, but the broader influence she had sought remained elusive. More painful still was the realization that her campaign had actually strengthened William and Kate's position rather than weakening it. The crisis had demonstrated to both the royal family and the broader public that William and Kate were willing to fight for their roles and principles. Their handling of the conflict had shown maturity, professionalism, and genuine commitment to service that impressed even their critics. In contrast, Camilla's efforts appeared increasingly petty and self-serving. Perhaps most significantly, the episode had clarified the future direction of the monarchy. Charles's support for William and Kate's approach signaled that the institution would continue to evolve toward a more modern, accessible, and personally engaged model rather than reverting to older forms of hierarchical formality. The media coverage gradually shifted away from palace intrigue toward positive stories about Kate's recovery and renewed commitment to her work. Her first major public speech after the health scare addressed mental health awareness and the importance of seeking help during difficult times, a message that resonated powerfully with the public and generated overwhelmingly positive coverage. Behind the scenes, the royal household worked to repair relationships and establish clearer protocols for managing family dynamics. Sir Clive Alderton implemented new procedures for discussing changes to royal responsibilities, ensuring that future proposals would be evaluated through formal channels rather than private campaigns. William and Kate emerged from the crisis stronger and more confident in their positions. The experience had tested their relationship with the broader royal family and proven their resilience under pressure. They had also demonstrated their ability to protect their interests and values without resorting to the kind of destructive tactics that might damage the monarchy's public standing. The children's hospital that had been at the center of the patronage dispute sent Kate a beautiful bouquet with a card signed by dozens of young patients and their families. The gesture reminded everyone involved why these roles mattered beyond palace politics. Real people and real organizations depended on the authentic commitment that Kate had consistently provided. 6 months later, at the annual family Christmas gathering at Sandringham, the surface tensions had largely subsided. Camilla and Kate exchanged cordial greetings and participated jointly in family activities, though their relationship remained more formal than it had been before the conflict. Charles had learned valuable lessons about managing family dynamics and the importance of addressing conflicts before they escalated to damaging levels. He implemented regular family meetings focused on coordination and communication rather than allowing grievances to fester in private. William had gained a deeper appreciation for the complexities of royal life and the importance of protecting not just individual positions, but the values and principles that made those positions meaningful. His experience defending Kate's work had prepared him well for the future challenges he would face as heir to the throne. For Kate, the period had been both difficult and transformative. She had been forced to defend her life's work under intense scrutiny and pressure, but she had emerged with even stronger relationships with her patronages and greater confidence in her own judgment and capabilities. The crisis had ultimately strengthened the monarchy by clarifying its values and priorities. The institution had chosen evolution over tradition, authenticity over hierarchy, and genuine service over ceremonial display. These choices would shape the royal family's approach to public service for generations to come. As the family gathered for Christmas dinner that year, the conversations flowed more naturally than they had in months. The immediate crisis had passed, relationships had been tested and proven resilient, and the future direction of the monarchy was clearer than it had been in years. Camilla had not achieved her original objectives, but she had inadvertently helped to define what the modern monarchy valued most: genuine commitment, authentic relationships, and service that went beyond mere obligation. These were lessons that would serve the royal family well as it continued to adapt to changing times and public expectations. The game was over, but the institution was stronger for having played it out. And in the grand sweep of royal history, this chapter would be remembered not for the conflict it contained, but for the clarity and purpose it ultimately provided to Britain's evolving monarchy.